Hey, remember last time we sort of tackled this whole TSMC thing? And why some folks online, well, they kept calling it USMC. You'd think we'd put that to bed, right?
You really would. But it seems like that specific idea, it just has legs, doesn't it? It keeps coming back.
Yeah.
So maybe for anyone still kind of scratching their heads, let's take another run at it.
Yeah.
Really try and nail down what's actually going on here.
Exactly. Our mission today, let's make it crystal clear. Why the heck does Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, I mean, we're talking the undisputed king of chip makers, right?
Yeah.
Based in Taiwan since '87, listed everywhere, TWSE, NYSE. Why do they keep getting stuck with this USMC nickname? Especially, let's be honest, you see it a lot from commenters, sometimes based in China. What is the real story?
It's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of some, well, pretty significant geopolitical stuff. Technology dynamics, too. The sources we've been digging into, they give a really fascinating, maybe slightly concerning peek behind that curtain. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
All right, so let's get down to brass tacks then. This USMC label, I mean, nobody at TSMC actually voted for that, did they? It's not like their new official brand or anything.
Oh, absolutely not. No, USMC isn't official anything. At best, maybe it's a simple misunderstanding. But honestly, it seems more likely it's a deliberate distortion, a way to twist the narrative.
Okay.
And the effect that has, that's the crucial part. It tries to paint TSMC as like purely a U.S. thing, conveniently forgetting or maybe deliberately obscuring its deep, deep Taiwanese roots.
Okay, so if it's not a real name, what's the play? Why are some people pushing this angle so hard? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, our sources point towards a few potential motivations. They kind of range from strategic geopolitical moves to, well, maybe just trying to feel a bit better about their own situation, perhaps. One really big piece of this puzzle seems to be something called cognitive warfare, specifically aimed at Taiwan.
Cognitive warfare. Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that for a second. What exactly are we talking about there? Sounds intense.
Yeah, it sounds dramatic, but think of it like this. Using information, or maybe misinformation, to kind of mess with people's heads, to influence what they believe, how they feel, how they might act.
Right.
So in this case, the goal could be to sort of chip away at the confidence Taiwanese people have in their own, world-leading industries.
Yeah.
If you suggest a huge company like TSMC is really just, a puppet for the U.S., it can plant seeds of doubt about their government, about their businesses, maybe even weaken that sense of national identity that's tied to companies like TSMC. And, another angle could just be to stir up trouble, create friction between the U.S. and Taiwan.
Wow. That sounds, like something out of a spy novel. Is there actual evidence suggesting that's really happening, or is it more speculation?
Well, the narrative itself, this USMC thing, it definitely fits a pattern, a broader pattern of trying to undermine Taiwan's status, create divisions.
Yeah.
But there's another possible angle, too, maybe looking more at internal dynamics within China. Think about it. If you frame TSMC's expansion in the U.S. as some kind of big loss for Taiwan, it could be a useful way to distract from the challenges China's own semiconductor industry is facing. With companies like SMIC, Huawei running into those U.S. restrictions.
Ah, okay. So it's like a classic misdirection. Look over here at this supposed problem while the real action or lack of action is over there.
Exactly. Kind of like a magician's trick, yeah. Highlighting TSMC's global growth, but painting it as a negative for Taiwan. That could help manage anxieties inside China about their own tech progress compared to Taiwan's. And then there's maybe a psychological element, too.
How so?
Well, Taiwan is the leader in advanced chip manufacturing. That's just a fact, and it's a huge deal. For some, perhaps, it's just psychologically difficult to accept that. So it might be easier to dismiss it by saying, oh, it's not really them. It's all down to the Americans.
Okay, so let's push back on that. Let's set the record straight for anyone who might still be a bit fuzzy on this. Why is TSMC, beyond any doubt, fundamentally a Taiwanese company? Lay out the facts.
Okay, the core facts are really straightforward. TSMC was founded in Taiwan. It's registered in Taiwan. All the major strategic decisions made in Taiwan. Their headquarters are in Hsinchu, and crucially, they pay their taxes in Taiwan.
Right.
Now, when a company gets as big as TSMC, it's completely normal to expand globally. They have operations or planned ones in the U.S., Japan, Germany, even China. But that's about managing risk, being closer to key markets. It doesn't change the company's origin or its identity.
It's like any big multinational, right? Having offices all over doesn't suddenly make Ford a German company just because they sell cars there.
Exactly. But what about ownership? That's another point people raise. Are the Americans pulling the strings through investments now?
Yeah, good question.
Not really, no. I mean, yes, you'll find big international investment firms like Vanguard, BlackRock as major shareholders. That's common for huge public companies. But Taiwan's own National Development Fund is also a major shareholder. And more importantly, the control of the company, the board, the day-to-day management, the strategic direction, that all remains firmly based in Taiwan, run by Taiwanese leadership.
Okay, that's clear. Now, what about the tech, the really advanced stuff, the nanometer race? Is that all being shipped off to the U.S. plant?
That's a really, really important point to clarify. And the answer is no. While the plant they're building in Arizona is definitely significant, it was initially planned for 5-nanometer tech, maybe 4-nanometer later.
Which is still pretty advanced stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Very advanced. But the absolute cutting edge, the R&D, the development, and the current manufacturing of the most advanced chips, like 3-nanometer, and where they're going next with 2-nanometer and beyond, that is all happening right now in Taiwan, primarily in Hsinchu and Tainan science parks.
So the crown jewels, the real bleeding-edge innovation, that's staying put in Taiwan.
Exactly. Taiwan remains the absolute center, the hub of innovation for TSMC. And, it's not just about TSMC itself. You have to look at the whole picture, the entire supply chain. Critical equipment, those incredibly complex EUV lithography machines, for example, they come from ASML. That's a Dutch company in the Netherlands, not the U.S. Plus, Taiwan has spent decades building this unique, incredibly dense ecosystem. Specialized suppliers, a massive pool of highly skilled engineering talent.
Right.
That whole environment's not something you can just easily copy and paste somewhere else overnight. Think of it like trying to replicate Silicon Valley somewhere else. It's more than just buildings.
It's the people, the network, the culture.
Precisely. It's that whole integrated system. You can't just pick up the recipe, as it were, and expect to bake the same perfect cake in a brand new kitchen immediately.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we touched briefly last time on how China sometimes approaches tech development. How does that compare or contrast with TSMC's situation with the U.S. investment?
Well, right. We have seen some cases involving certain Chinese tech companies where there seems to be significant state influence, maybe even pressure for technology transfer or sharing. With TSMC and its U.S. expansion, there's no evidence of the U.S. demanding TSMC hand over its core proprietary technology. It's not that kind of deal. In fact, TSMC's own leadership, people like Chairman Mark Liu, the founder Morris Chang himself, they've been very public, very clear about how incredibly difficult it would actually be to replicate Taiwan's most advanced production lines in the U.S.
Yeah.
They talk about the talent density, the work culture differences, that whole integrated supply chain we just discussed.
So they've been pretty upfront saying, hey, it's not that simple.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe rapid fire some of these specific claims that float around related to this USMC idea. Claim number 1, TSMC is now controlled by the U.S. government. Fact or fiction?
Total fiction. Taiwanese board, Taiwanese management, R&D centered in Taiwan, key decisions made in Taiwan.
Okay. Claim number 2. The factory being built in Arizona is TSMC's most advanced facility. True or false?
Oh, false. As we said, the absolute cutting-edge technology development and production remains firmly in Taiwan. The U.S. plant will use slightly older, though still very sophisticated process nodes.
And just to remind everyone, node size, smaller numbers generally mean more powerful, more advanced chips.
Exactly right. Smaller is generally better and harder to achieve in the semiconductor world.
Okay. Claim number 3. TSMC is now basically working primarily for the U.S. military. What's the reality there?
That's a big distortion. TSMC serves a massive global customer base. Major tech companies all over the world rely on them. That includes the big American tech giants, who are major customers, sourcing chips from TSMC's fabs in Taiwan. The U.S. plan is about geographic diversification, supply chain resilience. Sure, North American clients make up a large slice of revenue, maybe around 70% recently, but that reflects huge commercial partnerships, not military directives or control.
Got it. Claim number 4. Now that there's a TSMC factory on U.S. soil, the Americans are just going to copy or steal all their technology. How likely is that?
Extremely unlikely. Morris Chang, the founder, has basically said as much.
Yeah.
The sheer complexity, that Taiwanese ecosystem we talked about, plus very strong intellectual property protections, makes just copying it incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Right. And finally, claim number 5. By building these factories overseas, Taiwan is effectively giving away its lifeline, its most valuable asset. Accurate or not?
Definitely inaccurate. You could argue Taiwan is TSMC's lifeline and vice versa. The vast majority of their production capacity, we're talking maybe 80 to 90%, remains firmly rooted in Taiwan. These overseas plants are supplementary. They're additions, not replacements.
Okay. So when you lay out the facts like that, this whole USMC narrative really seems to fall apart under scrutiny. What's your take then on why it persists? It feels deliberate, doesn't it?
Yeah, our analysis really points strongly in that direction. It seems much less about factual accuracy and much more about, well, opinion manipulation, potentially with a very specific and maybe not very friendly agenda. Sowing confusion, creating division.
So what's the end game? If it is deliberate, what do they hope to achieve by pushing this?
Well, geopolitically, the goal could be to paint Taiwan as, subordinate to the U.S., kind of under its thumb. That could potentially weaken Taiwan's international image it support, maybe stir up nationalist sentiment within China, directed against both the U.S. and Taiwan. Economically, it might serve as a way to downplay Taiwan's incredible technological achievement with TSMC. Perhaps, as we suggested, to distract from China's own ongoing challenges in the high-end semiconductor space. There's also the possibility of trying to create divisions within Taiwan itself.
How so?
By making people question the strategy. Is the government selling out? Is TSMC losing its edge by going abroad? That kind of thing. Ultimately, it really seems to fit neatly into a broader narrative aimed at undermining Taiwan's independent status and global standing. This isn't just about some silly online nickname. This kind of persistent mischaracterization, it can subtly erode confidence, national pride, maybe even influence policy debates down the line if it gains enough traction. It's like a constant, low-level drip feed of doubt.
That's a really interesting point. And it's also interesting that we hear USMC so much, but you don't really hear people talking about German MC or Japan MC, even though TSMC is investing heavily in those places too. Why the intense focus specifically on the U.S. connection?
That's a great observation. The heightened scrutiny on the U.S. probably stems from a few things. First, the sheer scale of the U.S. investment is huge. You mentioned figures around $165 billion being discussed. That naturally draws more attention. Second, there's the perception and reality of a very close strategic relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan. That closeness, while beneficial in many ways, can also fuel anxieties within Taiwan about, becoming too dependent or losing control, the fear of becoming just a U.S. semiconductor company.
Right.
The investments in Japan through the JASM venture, they seem to be viewed a bit differently, more collaborative perhaps, focused on slightly more mature technology nodes, crucial for things like cars and industrial applications. There seems to be less public controversy around tech transfer there. Plus, maybe the history of Japan's own semiconductor industry, which has seen some decline from its peak, means there's just less of a perceived threat or rivalry compared to the U.S. focus.
So the USMC term really taps into those specific underlying fears within Taiwan about the U.S. partnership potentially compromising its core industry and national interests.
Exactly. It plays directly on those anxieties.
And what about this related idea? Sometimes you hear it alongside USMC, the claim about stolen technology. How does that connect?
Yeah, the USMC idea and these claims about stolen technology, they might actually originate from some genuine, understandable concerns within Taiwan about the implications of large-scale overseas investment. People asking legitimate questions.
Okay.
However, our sources strongly suggest that these narratives, even if they have local roots, can be seized upon and significantly amplified. Amplified as part of China's broader cognitive warfare efforts. The goal being to influence Taiwanese public opinion, undermine trust, particularly in the U.S.-Taiwan partnership.
Cognitive warfare again. Can you give us a clearer picture of what those tactics actually look like on the ground?
Sure. China's methods can be quite varied. It can involve spreading outright fake news, maybe using fake online profiles, sometimes even posing as journalists or analysts, leveraging social media platforms, forums, comment sections to push specific messages repeatedly.
Like what kind of messages?
We've seen documented examples like narratives portraying the U.S. as an unreliable partner just using Taiwan for its own ends, stories suggesting Taiwan is being taken advantage of in the deal. There have even been campaigns trying to stir up opposition to TSMC's other overseas projects, like its expansion in Nanjing, China, ironically, or spreading false rumors, like TSMC halting advanced chip supplies to Chinese companies.
So while the initial USMC worry might stem from real Taiwanese concerns, it looks like China is potentially exploiting and fanning those flames to create division and distrust.
That seems very likely. There's no, smoking gun memo proving they invented the term USMC, but the way it's used and the way it benefits certain narratives they push makes it highly probable they're involved in amplifying it. And those stolen technology claims, they often lack concrete evidence. They tend to be wrapped in very emotional, politically charged language. That's often a red flag for manipulation. The contrast is telling, too. We just don't see the same kind of widespread, intense stolen tech narrative around the TSMC investments in Japan or Germany. TSMC, like any foundry, has to share some process information with clients, but their core intellectual property is fiercely guarded. The U.S. investment is primarily about building manufacturing capacity on U.S. soil for resilience, not about tech theft.
So, boiling it down, the USMC campaign, amplified or not, aims to create this perception of U.S. control, specifically to undermine Taiwan's confidence in its own semiconductor leadership.
Precisely. It's about shaping perceptions, eroding trust, weakening that sense of technological sovereignty.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly for our last main point. One of our sources also brought up China's actions regarding Pakistan and its relationship with India. How does that connect to all this? Is China trying to maybe keep the tech supply chain closer to home by making other regions look less stable?
That's an interesting angle. China's support for Pakistan through things like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, and significant military aid, it serves multiple strategic goals for Beijing. Primarily, it's seen as a way to counterbalance India's growing regional and global influence. By supporting Pakistan, China creates a persistent strategic challenge on India's western border, diverting Indian resources and attention.
And CPEC gives them that port access too, right?
Exactly. CPEC provides China with valuable access to the Arabian Sea, bypassing the Malacca Strait choke point. Now, could this activity create a perception of regional instability? Yes, possibly. That might make some international investors pause or feel a bit hesitant about committing large sums to India, at least in the short term.
So a way to potentially make India seem like a riskier bet for companies looking to diversify away from China.
It could contribute to that perception in the short term, yes. However, we need to look at the bigger picture. The major global trend right now is supply chain diversification away from China, and countries like India are major beneficiaries of that trend. This shift is driven by fundamental factors: India's massive market potential, ongoing policy reforms there designed to attract investment, and the strengthening strategic partnership between the U.S. and India. These are powerful, long-term drivers.
So big companies aren't necessarily spooked.
Well, major players like Apple are significantly expanding production in India. Even TSMC itself has been reported to be exploring possibilities in India. So while China's actions in supporting Pakistan might create some geopolitical ripples and maybe some short-term investor caution, the underlying long-term economic and strategic logic pushing companies towards India seems quite strong. Plus, let's not forget, China is facing its own significant economic headwinds right now: the real estate crisis, slowing growth, concerns about foreign investment outflow. That limits its ability to simply dictate where global supply chains go.
Right, context is key. Okay, that definitely provides a broader perspective on the regional dynamics. So let's try and wrap this all up. To bring it all together, what are the main takeaways we want people to remember from this deep dive today?
Okay, I think 4 or 5 key things. First, and most importantly, TSMC is fundamentally, undeniably a Taiwanese company. Its roots, control, and innovation center are in Taiwan.
Okay.
Second, this USMC narrative, it's overwhelmingly likely to be misinformation, or at least a deliberate distortion. It seems driven by political and maybe psychological motives, not facts.
Got it.
Third, the core, cutting-edge technology, and the strategic decision-making. That remains firmly anchored in Taiwan. Overseas plants are expansions, not relocations of the core. Fourth, it's highly possible that external actors are exploiting genuine concerns within Taiwan about globalization and investment, using cognitive warfare tactics to sow discord. And finally, while geopolitical maneuvering, like China's support for Pakistan, can influence investor perceptions short-term, the larger, long-term trend of supply chain diversification towards places like India seems set to continue, driven by strong economic fundamentals.
That's a great summary. So the bottom line for listeners really is, when you encounter these kinds of narratives online, especially ones that seem designed to provoke a strong reaction, just pause, take a breath, think critically, ask yourself, where is this coming from? Who benefits from me believing this? What might the real agenda be?
Exactly. Question the source. Always try to check against the known facts, and just be aware that there's often more going on beneath the surface, especially with topics this complex and politically charged.
Sound advice. All right, well, on that note, if you appreciate these kinds of deep dives, trying to untangle complex issues, make sure you hit that subscribe button for the deep dive. We'd love to have you back. And hey, while you're at it, why not check out our good friend Micky's YouTube channel? Always interesting perspectives over there, too. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you. It was a great discussion.